Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code expediting company. Today, I have Jamie Fales from KOW Building Consultants. Jamie, welcome aboard.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming down on this July hot week that we've had.
Scorcher, yeah.
It's a scorcher. And actually, not by coincidence, but we talk about, how hot it is outside. Part of what we're going to talk about today is about getting a building ready for commissioning. Is it ready to go for all of the elements in the building? Mostly heating, air conditioning, hot water, all those things. So I always start the show about how I get my guests. And Ken Willett came on the show a while ago, your boss, and he called me up out of the blue and he said, listen, I think Jamie would be a great guest. He actually does the on-site commissioning of buildings for our company. And I was like, wow, this is a great topic. It involves what we do to get a building to TCO and then to final CO, and you're an integral part of it. So just to, first right off the bat, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what actually commissioning of a building is, how the building department has made that a requirement now, and, a little bit about what you do day to day.
Sure. So, my role on site is to just go through as building's finishing up. We start at the end of the design. We're looking at the designs that come out and see what's the feasibility of checking certain systems, like how easy are they going to be for maintenance? Do we have valves in the right positions so we could isolate certain rooms? Filters, are they accessible? So we're starting to look at that towards the end of the design work, and then we take a pause for a while as the building gets built, and then towards the end of the systems get installed. So we're talking the last 12 months of a building coming online. We're coming out to site to witness startups, be there as especially for VRF equipment, which is everywhere now.
Everywhere.
We're there for pressure testing with nitrogen. We're there for evacuation. We're there for final charge. And then any other major startups that you have. So ERV units, energy ventilators, looking at booster pumps, gas startups,
hot water heaters,
any major equipment that's coming up online.
So just to go back a second, you made a valid point about, so here we are, we put in this HVAC system and we have filters.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we, a couple of weeks into the project and the thing's running and people moved in and the maintenance crew goes out and they go to open up the filter box and they go to take the filter out and they get stuck because there's a pipe in the way.
Yep, you can't get
it. That's really, it gets that detailed, correct?
It can, yeah. And that's where we're trying to figure out early on, like, do you have a hatch nearby that's going to be large enough to fit a filter without bending it in half,
Right.
So is it going to be that your drop ceiling is so close to the equipment that it's not very accessible? Did you put a light right in your drop ceiling right under where the ventilation is? So.
Right, or to get to the valves, or to get so it's not just about making sure that they install the right equipment, that it's actually running properly, but it's also to maintain it properly for the life of the building or the life of that piece of equipment.
Yeah, if you have a drop ceiling that's in a room that's 15 feet high, but the drop ceiling is only at 9 feet, where are you going to put that fan in the room? So if you have an additional fan, is it up near the ceiling, or do you drop it down and have it right over the drop ceiling so that somebody can
you
work
can
on
get
it?
to it?
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes that's not there.
So take us. So I know you and I off the air we talked about it. Is that we know that it's a requirement. To get an engineer's report, and we submit it to the building department prior to the final CO. But it's also part of. The building department asks us at the time of TCO, has your commissioning started?
Yep.
And it's important that you've commenced it.
Yep.
Because you can't finish and get your final CO without the requirement. So as part of that, in my eyes, it sounds like a special inspection, but it really isn't. So tell us a little bit about that, I know you need to be the person who reviews the commissioning report has to be a PE. There's someone like yourself that's certified to do this from whatever organizations, because it's not the building department, it's multiple organizations. So tell the audience a little bit about what that means and really what it represents.
Yeah, so we're required to perform commissioning in New York City under New York City Energy Code. New York State also includes it in their standards.
Absolutely.
So we're looking at it's based on, instead of building size, it's based on energy
BTUs,
usage.
right.
So yeah, how many BTUs is it?
So tell us about that, because that's important. So, when it first came to my mind, the first thing I thought of was size.
Yeah.
Right? Because usually everything in the building code talks about, well, if it's 75 feet, it's 150, it's a high rise, it's a low rise, it's stories. Here, when you and I were talking about it, it's really about BTU usage.
Yeah.
And it's not very high.
It's not very
So-
high.
So give the, again, inform the audience a little bit about, I know we talked about a threshold of around 600,000,
Yeah.
but give them a comparison of what 600,000 really means in heating versus air conditioning and why you would fall into this requirement.
Yeah, so it's sort of like you're looking at a 10 apartment building if it's sort of affordable apartments. If you're looking at luxury apartments that might have a lot larger spaces, a lot larger ceiling heights, it might be even less than that. So you could be looking at 2, 3, 4 apartments might hit your threshold.
So in terms of size, it really doesn't mean you could have 4 apartments or you could have 10 apartments.
Yeah.
It's all about the BTU usage.
Yeah, and so we're talking about this. This is for new builds. This is for gut rehabs. This is if you have a boiler plant replacement. So if you got to pull out that steam boiler and put another new one in, you might be triggering a commissioning requirement.
Got it. So it revolves around the heating size.
Yeah, I mean, cooling's also mentioned, so
Okay.
it could be for that too. It's just generally majority of systems that are getting
So it applies
installed.
to all new buildings. It applies to all major rehabs, and potentially if you're replacing your heating plant.
systems. Yeah, yeah. System
And how about if you were replacing just your cooling?
that's why there's also a trigger there. So like if like you're replacing a chiller or cooling tower, it might trigger. So it's something to look into when you're falling into those situations.
Gotcha. And now, usually your firm will be working with the mechanical engineers of record for the project,
Yep.
right? Whether it's a new building or an old CO. And you you help them establish whether their building requires commissioning or not.
So it's usually we're hired directly by the owner. So we're getting hired parallel to the general contractor. And so we're reviewing the drawing sets of the engineer. We're looking at the submittals, the specifications.
So completely independent from the MEP.
From the MEP.
From
yeah.
the MEP.
So we're coming
But
in.
obviously you're working closely with them, but you're not.
We're sort of a check and balance on the general
Correct.
contractor and the subcontractors. So, and we want to have a really good relationship with them so that things go smoothly. We get through the documentation quickly.
Of course. And if you see something, you feel comfortable that if you let the mechanical contractor know, he's like, oh, wow, thank you. You picked that up, then I don't have to worry about this
Yeah,
later.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not,
catch
it's
the
not
stuff
really an adversary situation. It's about checking checks and balances to make sure that you've left no stone unturned, that when we're ready to use the building every day and maintain the building every day, that we can do it successfully, efficiently, and meet the energy code.
If we can figure out a problem as we're installing a piece of equipment, that could save a lot of money and headaches later on for callbacks. So let's really try to catch it ahead of time.
Even in our own homes, we've all done it. We installed something. I just moved, so we moved up to the country house, and I was putting something together, and I put the whole thing together. I was so happy, and then I went to open the door, and I realized, oh boy, I didn't have enough clearance.
Yeah.
And then it defeated the whole purpose of what I bought, because it was to get more room, and I ended up with less room than when I originally started. So it happens every day, even as architects like myself, or even as as contractors, engineers. It's just part of the way it is. You know, just. It's oversight. Sometimes it's just.
I mean, it's crazy. It's like, how many times do you walk into a building, you get up to the elevator room, mechanical room, and that door's propped open.
Yeah.
And that door's propped open because they don't have enough air conditioning, so somebody's got a fan blowing on the thing.
Right.
That's a solution that's going to exist forevermore in that building.
Correct.
Because somebody didn't do something originally.
Because it wasn't designed properly
Yeah.
from the beginning.
And-
so take us through. I'm a GC. I work for one of our clients, like Camber or Fifth Avenue Committee, which is some of your clients as well, affordable housing, right? And they hire you, and you go in, and we'll use Anthony Fristacci, Bruno Fristacci Contracting. You know him. Ken knows him also. We do all their expediting. He's winding down. He's calling us. Hey, Sisto, we're getting ready for our TCO. We got to go. We got to go. We got to go. You get there and you get on the job and you meet with Metro Mechanical.
Yeah.
Right, and you're going through the building at this point while they're trying to wrap it up.
Yeah.
They're bumping the units. They're getting the plumber's getting the hot water heater ready. Everybody's running around like crazy. Is that really the peak time for the commissioning?
Unfortunately, yes.
It is.
It's so it's
'Cause it
I
sounds
want to be there.
chaotic.
It is. So like if like there's a boiler plant getting installed, I want to be out there before they put insulation on. I want to be able to see the connections and make sure that we're good and solid before you insulate that work.
Right.
I want to make sure that it meets the way that it was set up in design. So let's make sure that everything's in the right place. It's the right model numbers that are there. Let's get all that.
Make sure the equipment's the right equipment. So in other words, if they called out for this steam trap, that if it was number 135, they put in a 135, that it didn't get switched to a 132, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because it's smaller or different.
I walked out to a building that had a really nice boiler plant, and I'm looking at it, and I look at this giant air separator that they have, and hydraulic separator. It's got 4 pipes across, and I couldn't understand why there's a 2-inch pipe coming out the top. And I was just looking at it, and I figured out they put that in upside down. And
That was the drain.
it's the drain line. So there's supposed to be an air vent on the top. Instead, they put the drain line on the top. They're going to have to rip it out and use the same piece of equipment, just flip it over. So stuff like that is good to catch
And it
early
happens.
on.
And it happens.
Yeah, it's not the craziest thing in the world. They got the pipes lined up directly. So just making sure that things are oriented the right way. Oftentimes you see with phasing with electricity where it's there's more ways to set it up wrong than there is to set it up right. And
There's many options with 3 wires. You know, there's a lot of possibilities. It's
Yeah.
not just one way.
Yeah.
You know, an outlet's easy. A single outlet, you got 2 wires and two screws, you're good to go. But the minute you start introducing a whole bunch of different wires, there's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah. You never want to let the smoke out. You want to
Exactly.
That's important smoke.
So now, tell us at the end of this, what is the product that you produce? Because I don't really. All I know is we get this affidavit. From somewhere. So for us, that's kind of like the receipt that it's done. But for you guys, there's more to it.
The report is giant.
I was just about to say. So tell us about what that report really encompasses, what it represents. You know, you give it to the owner. Does it then go to the facilities team? Does it go to the state? Where does all of this hard work you put in on this building, where does it go?
Yeah. So I'm using a software platform for all this. There's a few different versions of it: CX Alloy, Facility Grid, Blue Rhythm. There's a bunch of companies that have this platform. But so what we're doing is we're collecting as much information about these systems as we can. And we're going through and I'm going through checklists and trying to say, is this the right equipment that was in the drawings? Did that match what was in the submittals?
Did they install it properly? Is it working properly?
Is it in the right location? Did they swap 2 units on the floor? So trying to figure out all that, record that, and then we're building.
And it's all data input into a program.
Yeah, and so then we're taking on all of these points. We're looking through, like first I'm going through and doing a walkthrough, make sure it's the right equipment. Then I'm going through and I'm going through functional tests. So every piece of equipment can have like a occupancy sensor usually has about 10 questions that we have to answer about it.
Correct.
When you're talking about a boiler, it could be
100 questions.
Yeah, 100, 120.
Right. And they're all pre-populated questions through the program?
They are. I have to do some edits for if this equipment has this sort of
but I mean, the boilerplate is there,
yeah.
but then you adjust based on the equipment and the type of equipment.
Yeah.
So it's pretty boilerplate, but but it's not black and white. It's got a lot
you
of
got to
gray in
choose
it.
the right script. But I wrote all the scripts myself. I had to come up with all the questions, what we're going to ask. So for every type of equipment, even if it's a radiator, how are we going to test that? Are any valves? Are there any controls? So like we're trying to come up with all of that. Usually for apartments, we're sampling like a 10% rate. We're going into apartments and seeing 10% of equipment. That's ventilation, that's heating, cooling, stuff like that.
Because usually, if there's one problem, the problem may exist in multiple places.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
you said, you had one where the radiators were you found out you thought they were all leaking, but in reality they were all sweating, and you found the main cause. So even though you may only look at 10%, you were able to look at 2 or 3, and you had the same problem. You identified it. Well, it can't be singled out.
Yeah.
It's not just this one location; it's multiple locations. Something bigger is happening.
Yeah, it's like I found in one building where I was sampling. I always like to have a sample on the top floor and the bottom floor if I can. It turns out I was testing top floor apartments and I could not get the heat to operate. And every other floor, you could shut off the heat to an individual PTAC. But on the top floor for the hydronic system, they had a 3-way valve because you want to bypass some of the water back down if you weren't
It's
heating.
at the end of the loop.
Yeah, they installed the 3-way valve backwards. So now there was no position that would allow water to flow through the PTAC. So we were never able to get any flow.
Never able to, because it was just circulating right back down.
Yeah, so that existed on the entire floor. I had to come up with
hot water back.
Yes, get the submittal and be like, here's how it's supposed to be installed. Here's a picture of it. Upload that all to the software. It has its own issues log. Then I can assign those issues and assign it to each subcontractor.
Some of the subs may not like you very much.
Yeah, well, but like if I see an issue that's going to be in a lot of places or something like that.
If you catch it up front, then they don't have to keep going back there. How expensive is that?
Yeah.
Going back, can't find out why the heat, blame this, blame that, change this, change that. Meanwhile, it was the valve that wasn't installed properly. If you pick it up early enough in the process, think about for the next several months, how many times you would have been trying to troubleshoot it with people in the building at that point.
Oh, trying to get access and occupied?
Exactly. Yeah. That's my exact point. It always comes down to time and access and what it takes to do it. It's not easy. So now you got it. So now it's all in this database.
Yeah.
And then Jamie goes over, he hits the golden button, and it prints this volumes of volumes of information,
like 700 pages.
Right.
It's huge. So it's usually like the important parts in that report are really like what are the open issues, how much of the testing has been completed. Have you looked at all the equipment or an entire sample set? We talked about the apartments. We look at 10%.
10%, right.
Common areas, I'm looking at 100%. So I'm looking at every air handler that's in the space. I'm looking at all major systems. So
exhaust, the whole deal.
So it's a lot. And so trying to compile all that, put everything together, and then deliver a report that says, like, look, here's a log of everything that we've tested. You don't need to go through every single test script, but they're all there at the last in the last appendix.
But this is the areas of concern.
Yeah, and it shows that we've gone through, we've tested, we've considered, and it's like this doesn't apply for this piece of equipment because of this, or we weren't able to. Sometimes we're not able to look at certain things because we were brought on too late, or something like a wall was closed up before we could get there. So we got to note that, and it says, we didn't look at this, but we're still aware that that's a test question. So
now, fast forward, we get the TCO.
Yeah.
Everybody moves in. You finish your report a few months later.
Yeah.
They get a final CO.
Yeah.
What is your role as in commissioning the buildings for the maintenance part of it, if any? After the final CO is issued and the building's up and running for a few years. I know this is new, but I'm just curious because it sounds as though that the role of this can get, an owner can find value in someone coming back after several months and saying, hey, you commissioned our building. We're still getting complaints on the 3rd floor that it's too hot and the 1st floor is too cold and the hot water's not running enough. And your report said everything was in pretty good shape. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's like at that point I have all this software. I've built all of this profile of everything that's going on in the building, and we have the ability to turn that over to a site maintenance team. If they
to the
want to
facilities.
keep it, we can transfer it all to them. And then at that point, they can use that as their Bible for everything that's in the building, how
If
they're
they
going
need
to
to look
it.
for it, right? It's like they're as built of all their.
Yeah.
We used to call them when I was in college. I used to do the valve charts.
Yeah.
Where we used to put the brass tags, and this is number 67. And my job was to go and talk to the plumber and to the mechanical guys who installed it and said, valve number 67. And he'd say, that's low pressure steam to unit number 37.
Yeah.
And then this is drain for and this is, it was massive.
Yeah, yeah. And now they when you're working on big facilities like a hospital, they might put a QR code next to any specific piece of equipment.
Great.
You can put that sticker on. It's tagged
their
right to
own
your piece of
phone.
equipment. It pulls it all up, gives you everything you need.
We used to have those metal things.
so-
We used to have to crimp them on the
Yeah.
valves. That
We're
gives
not
my
quite doing
data
that
away.
yet. Yeah. So, but it's
And the
it's-
best
it's a
part
lot.
is they used to hold up our retainage. I worked before I started design, I worked for a plumbing company. And they used to hold our retainage up. I was the
Yeah.
draftsman, and he'd be like, go do these valves. And I remember, oh my God, there's because we did hospitals
Yeah.
and nursing
Yeah.
homes,
Yeah.
5,000 valves. It was most of them were steam systems
Yeah.
with the F&T traps. And
and they're hot, and you're under there, and you're
oh
sweating.
God,
and,
it was
yeah.
brutal.
Yeah, I feel for you. I've been in those rooms.
Yeah.
So it can be a lot, and so we're
So,
trying to.
so now they have so you're saying that really your commissioning report actually acts as part of their as-bills, part of their daily, if they need it as a resource, that if they want to go back to a piece of equipment and go, oh, I don't remember, I think it was a Samsung. Well, was it a Samsung or wasn't it? Well,
Yeah.
no, they were all Samsungs, and here it is. And the one that feeds the first floor common area is a Samsung. Here's the model number. Here's the BTUs. Here's everything you need. Boom, you got it handy. And then, obviously, with today's technology, they put that all into a database somewhere.
Yeah, and we're trying to verify that a lot of the documentation has been pulled together. So, like, let's make sure that we have all the operations and maintenance manuals for every major piece of equipment that's on site. So that's something that's really easy to overlook as you're exiting a building as
Sure.
a GC, but like that's going to be a key thing for site staff.
Correct.
So we're checking off on a box, like yes, we have that.
Right.
And then startup reports. So this
Very
is becoming super critical, especially with these VRF systems. That like if you come a year down the line and the system's not working right, well, how much charge did we put into it? Did we confirm that our evacuation
was it working?
correct?
Was
Yeah.
it working right when you started it?
Yeah.
Just because you turned it on doesn't mean it's working right.
Yeah.
As I'm doing this podcast with you, I always put people always ask me, well, how'd you end up in this business, right?
Yeah.
And I always tell my story, and I always think of my guests, and I always ask them, and I didn't ask you this up front, but I'm going to ask you now, is how the heck did you get into this, and how did you find this? How did you find this passion? Because it's not like, hey, I think I want to just, when I grow up, I'm going to go and commission buildings, So there had to be an evolution. There had to be some kind of organic growth for you to get to this. So tell us a little bit about how you got here, and when did New York City or New York State actually start adopting this as a mandatory? Was it part of Local Law 97? Is it a separate local law? Give us a little background about yourself personally and why it's happening.
So I studied some mechanical engineering in college. I finished with an environmental science degree. I really wanted to be sort of hands-on and helping with sort of environmental issues with building with companies. And so when I ended up getting an internship, that was at Bright Power to help them with the first year Local Law 87 in 2013. So I helped that. I got into buildings. They brought me in to verify all the corrections had been made. So I'm going through checking weather stripping, checking all the pipe installation. And then through that, I start doing steam trap testing and then doing controls work. And then
So that's how it evolved.
that's how it evolved. And then I ended up, after the internship finished, I ended up in Connecticut doing home energy audits. So I did 300 energy audits in a year and a half. It was an insane workload. At Next Step Living, company was was super busy and later went bust, and so they're totally gone. But we were doing good work at the time, and went into a lot of big homes in the Fairfield County area.
Yep, that's where I'm from, and you were too.
Yep, and so did a lot of testing there, combustion testing, doing lighting retrofits, doing insulation scoping.
Right.
So
the whole energy audit.
yeah. So and then when that finished, I went back to Bright Power. They hired me on. I was there for 8 years doing local ID7. Went over to sort of managing sort of some of their small construction projects where they're just doing some retrofits for energy efficiency, pump replacement, stuff like that. And then that sort of transitioned during COVID into I switched over to the commissioning team. So I did that for 3 or 4 years over there. Commissioning has, as we talked about with New York City energy code as being a requirement, and now all these buildings have to.
Now you have to. It's not voluntary.
Yeah. So just getting in there early and getting through and trying to do all this testing, figuring out how deep we needed to go on these and common issues.
Sounds like it's going to be a big market.
Yeah, it's growing.
It's got to, because more and more buildings, all the new buildings that are going up, we've hit that low because there was no 421A, but now we have 485X. Hopefully that's going to get some momentum.
Yeah.
Our office does a lot of office to residential conversions.
Yeah.
So that's picking up some steam now, even though, it had a lot of fluff and no substance. But now with the, I think there's some incentives, and the right buildings can work.
Yeah.
Not all buildings can work,
And it's funny. It's like it's definitely picking up. So there's plenty of work to go. But even the white box spaces now that originally you're building out a space, you're saying let's leave that white box space until after we get our TCO.
Right.
We'll come back and finish it out later. Those spaces are often big enough that they need their own commissioning report.
Wow.
So coming into a building
Sure,
even
because
afterwards.
if the space is 10,000, 15,000 square feet, 600,000 BTUs with a high volume of space, it doesn't take a lot.
Yeah.
600,000 BTUs. I mean, you think about just a one-family house is a couple of 100,000. So, that's a couple of thousand square feet.
I'm working on a church right now that they so in the sanctuary they got 3 big rooftop units.
Sure,
but they have,
because of the volume.
But they have 3 VRF units, and then they have a hydronic system, and then there's a energy recovery ventilator, and so like systems get complex pretty quick, and all these spaces are sort of growing and evolving, and everything's doing multiple things, and so it just ends up being tougher to meet these evolving codes, how much ventilation is needed in the spaces, and we're putting more complex equipment into these systems.
Yeah, I also think that the regulatory part has grown. When we used to file 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was 10 pieces of paper.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to print it, they ask us, 100 questions on a small little project, but a lot of them are related to energy.
Yeah.
And because that's part of what we're focused on, and that's all part of it. So, as part of the show, Jamie, I told you before you came on board that we never try to put anybody on the spot. And my good friend Andrew Peters, when he first came on the show at the very beginning, we've kind of jumped onto it, and we use it all the time because he's a cost estimator, and his job is always predicting the future. And I'm not here to ask you to predict the future, but I like the scenario to ask the question of, so here we are, 2024 in the summer during a heat wave, and your job for building owners is to commission their buildings, to understand all of their systems. Are they working right? Can we maintain them right? And you have a responsibility to take all these findings, put a PE stamp on it, and give it to the building department and tell them, look, we did our job. They're in good shape. They can do this. Since this is new, if we were to fast forward and you were to make a prediction for next year when you come on the show again, because I think this is an incredible topic, and it's a new topic, which I love, because it means that people need to know about it, because sooner or later they're going to realize that they're going to
gotta do
buy
it.
something and they're gonna renovate and they're going to go, oh my God, we saw Sisto Says, and Jamie was on and we talked about commissioning a building. So where do you think this law is today and your responsibility in New York City as we move forward a year from now? Do you think it's going to change, and how do you think it'll change?
So I'm going to focus. I'm going to shift it a little. I think the two big things that I see happening in the next year or so are one is going to be refrigerant. You're talking about 421A. It's R410A is going to be the big issue. So if we're outlawing R410A, what's going to be the
Right.
replacement?
What's the replacement? Because we already got rid. I know, because I have an old unit,
Yeah.
and when before I sold my place, my mechanical guy always said, Sister, you're still on the old refrigerant.
Yep.
Once this goes, we got to replace both parts. I can't keep one or the other. And that's big.
Yeah, it's huge. So it's going to be really tricky to find out what the replacement's going to be. So right now, the leading replacement is propane. They're going to use propane as refrigerant.
I've been hearing this for a
Yeah.
long time, and it's
Yeah.
amazing that all of a sudden propane was something nobody wanted,
Yeah.
because it doesn't,
Greenhouse gas,
it's
yeah.
heavy and it stays down, and
It's
it doesn't.
explosive.
It's explosive.
We're
Meanwhile,
pressurizing explosive in somebody's house. So
Right.
it's kind of crazy. I obviously with FDNY, I think there's going to be a lot of issues there.
Yes.
CO2 is the other refrigerant. If they can get it to work, it's going to be great. There's some troubles with it right now. It's pretty difficult, high pressures, but if they can have it, that's something that's readily available. It's always going to be readily available. It's a byproduct of combustion, so
Right.
it's going to
So
be
we'll have it
pretty easy.
everywhere.
Yeah. So if they can get CO2 to work, it's going to be great. The other thing is that with all this electrification,
Yeah.
we're now putting these heat pump water heaters in all over the place. I think that we're gonna there's some risks there that we're not used to yet. We're putting units on the roof with potable water.
Right. Are they going to freeze?
Yeah. So you're putting these things. How do we back them up so that they don't freeze? We're
Right.
putting heat tape
Right.
on
But
them.
if we have no electric,
Then the whole thing freezes. So
whole thing
so
does.
now either you're gonna
it used to freeze before, but it was indoors. So if it's outdoors, it's going to
gonna be even
freeze
worse.
that much faster.
yeah. So now all of a sudden you're going to blow $500,000 worth of equipment because you just had this big freeze. So making sure that site staff is, if you're going to have it outside, that's already in your plans. Let's make sure that you have a plan for your site staff.
There has to
You
be
have drain
redundancies.
points. It's like not only do you have a drain point, but you have to have a vent point to allow air into the system, so
Right,
you're
you
not
can
holding
push it
that.
out.
So do you have to blow forced air into it? Are they going to be able to do that when the building doesn't have power? And what triggers that? So is it going to be below
All
freezing?
complicated
How
questions.
Many, yeah.
So definitely next year when you come back, we're going to be talking about. But
Yeah.
you're right. I put a generator in my place, and I have a generator where I'm living now, up in the country. And in the country, I'm on the last leg of the grid.
Mm-hmm.
So if one thing happens anywhere,
Yeah.
we're the very last piece. It comes from in town, and we're at the top of the mountain. I can't tell you, I think my generator runs every day. Because it doesn't take much, even if
No.
it's just for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Like with the heat wave, it just browns out somewhere. They got to switch it over. Well, by the time they switch it over, I'm on the last leg. It doesn't matter. So you could imagine in the wintertime, if you have all your equipment outdoors, and so what happens every time that you lose some power, the staff's got to go out there and try to drain it. Now you don't have power. How do you get it there? You got no tools. You can't use power tools. It's complicated. Listen, I understand the whole push for the electricity. There's no question. But to me, if the world is going to go, and this is my own personal opinion, the infrastructure for this should have started 35 years ago. You can't.
You're right.
We're on jobs that, as code consultants, as expediters, our owners are calling us, begging us, Sister, who do you know down at Con Ed? Who do you know? With to get us to get us, and they're telling them it's 6 months, but they don't have the equipment, they don't have the transformers, and they know in certain places the grid isn't strong enough to carry it, but they're mandated by the state. So I think we're going to have a tricky path.
For sure. And I was working on a building a few months back that they, up in Westchester, they filed their load letter a couple of years ago, a totally electric building. And so then they go and say, hey, we need permanent power.
And they say they don't have it.
So we don't have it on the street.
Well, that's happened to us too.
It's crazy. And so now what are you going to do? The building's stuck there, you're out of power, and it becomes a big.
It does, and I think the load letters for buildings are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Well, Jamie, this was incredibly soothing to me, and I use the word soothing because I'm glad that the DOB and the state are doing something like this, because I think in the end we're just making our finished products better.
Yeah.
The building's going to be better. They'll be more efficient. They'll be easier to maintain. And what you do as part of that role is really, really important. So thank you for sharing it with our audience. I do want to have you back. So the minute that I hear that they changed refrigerant, you're coming in and you're going to tell us if it's going to work or not.
Yeah.
But thank you for taking the day out.
Thank you for
coming
taking the
in.
time. Thanks.